Welcome to Story Time. On this program, we always emphasize that the story matters, which means your story matters, and the stories of others matter, and that becomes the essence of life as we connect with each other. So, my friend sitting at the table is Niki Glanz, and Niki is the author of a new book having to do with memory and momentum. Why don't you hold the book up there? Okay, that's nice. So, Niki, this is a research project.
It is.
So, tell me about yourself as a researcher. Is that where you started? Is that where you...
I actually did. I was trained to teach school, high school, and as part of a liberal arts education at Northwestern University. And then I proceeded to get my master's degree right away. The government funded me to study statistics so I could be an educational statistics expert.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a very good program. When I left the program, however, I also made sure that my position in the local school district would allow me to teach 3 classes of high school seniors in addition to doing their statistical work. And what I found during that year was that I much preferred the students to the statistics. And the statistics actually kind of bored me because you have your theory, and then from that you derive a hypothesis, and then you test to see if the hypothesis is true or false, and you have your results. And what have you learned? You've learned something, I guess, about yourself or your way of thinking, and was it correct or incorrect? But have you really learned much about the people that you were evaluating, and even the topic that you were evaluating? My feeling was I was not. I was uncomfortable, and so in the immediate future after that, I was a high school teacher, and I was very fortunate in teaching at the #1 rated school in the country at that time, believe it or not, Evanston, Illinois. I had actually done my student teaching there, so I guess I had an in.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as the years go by, well, then I did some administrative work in education, and more high school teaching in Bolivia, La Paz, Bolivia. We actually moved there for several reasons, to get to know another culture, and we had friends from our religion there, the Baha'i faith. So that was an interesting experience. My children also were able to get a great education there at the embassy school where I taught. I taught in the high school division, they were in the elementary. But then when I returned to the United States with my children, I decided that I really wanted more. It was great. The school in La Paz was again rated the #1 English teaching school in South America. So I had already been at 2 of the top high schools, and there's a certain problem if you can't keep continuing into something more and more and more or something, So I decided what I really needed to do was to get my doctorate. And as I was studying my doctorate, I became familiar with qualitative research, where you may be interested in a given issue or problem, much like statistical research, but this time you want to learn from the people who are involved, and you enable them to tell their stories. You mentioned stories. And I found that very much to my liking, and also very evocative. I was finding out all kinds of things, and I took that with me as I became a professor at the it's now the Augusta University in Augusta, Georgia, and I had one particularly wonderful research project where I was able to substantiate that building up children's self-esteem when they come from impoverished backgrounds is a viable strategy when it's also combined with high standards in the school. There had been research that came out that showed children who had these high self-esteems often were lacking in actual knowledge and abilities and skills that they hadn't learned in their schools, but they still felt great about themselves as learners. Well, that isn't the real world, and I was leery of that self-esteem movement for that reason. But it does indeed have merit when it's combined with high standards. I was fortunate enough to actually conduct this research project in a school that proved that, where they had a terrific organization, an administrative organization that did both, that held teachers and students accountable for learning, but also programmed into the school day, week after week, month after month, outings to teach them about the environment and their local community, where they would see adults working and contributing. And it was fantastic. These students came from homes where they wouldn't necessarily understand anything about what was going on behind the scenes in America. But through that school, they were learning and developing ambition and knowledge about how our society truly works. So it was a wonderful way to confirm the value of storytelling, and also finding knowledge. You know, we found out some wonderful things in that research project, thanks to the participation of the administration, the teachers, and the students. I learned from all of them.
So you continued the title of researcher, but the focus changed,
The
right?
focus and
From
change.
numbers to
Right,
people.
exactly. And actually, in the best of all worlds, you're going to have both. Because you could also have studied the actual performance of these students. I didn't have to do that because the principal had done it. You know, as I say, she had very high standards, and she was constantly measuring the students' actual knowledge. So I was able to summarize that in my study. But if the principal had not done that, that would be an important part of such a study. So I don't want to denigrate statistical research entirely. I'm just saying that I do think if that's exclusive of stories, then you are missing something else that's very vital. You're missing the human understanding of meaning and what was the real purpose of this, and did it work, and why or why not.
So you've seen that play out in your life in many different ways,
Yes,
right?
yes. And now here I am. Actually, I had to leave education and enter financial work when my children went to college, just to get some money.
Right.
And so for a while I wasn't doing either. Well, I was actually interested in the stories of the administrators of the various companies and bonds that I was thinking of purchasing. You know, I did research them in that way. As the rest of the financial world was only looking at statistics. And if I had done what they were doing, I would probably not have made money, because they were more experienced and they were better at it than me. But I looked instead, I made a very big point of just scanning the internet constantly for speeches by the CEO, speeches by the CFO. What was their mentality? What kind of people were they? Were they humble? Did they really be a part of the organization, or were part of the organization and got to know their staff? Or were they lording over it? To simplify what I was looking for.
Right.
And of course it was the former that were going to get the results. And I knew that from my studies as a doctorate student at University of Massachusetts. They were kind enough to allow me to be in their master's program, their master's business program for various courses, and on leadership and effective tactics used by those who got results. And that's what I was researching.
Yeah. So how did the
now,
focus of this book
right. So
shape?
yes, I was trying to explain that. Then finally I had to retire, of course, from my financial work, and especially after I did make some money. And yet burned within me was my love for education. And speaking of meaning, to me that's been maybe the most meaningful part of my life, is that I was able to raise children to have beliefs and purposes to their lives that I admire. And that was fantastic, and I give my children the credit. And then the fact that I have been able to work with students prior to that. And so it burned within me that I'd like to do one last qualitative research project that really mattered in education, because I had to leave, and make some money, and whereas I just really truly love education. Well, I came after a couple years of reading and studying and looking at the research that was being done. I decided I'd like to ask a really basic question. What do people find worthwhile learning in life? When they were kids and teenagers, what mattered to them that they can now put to use as adults? Because shouldn't teachers and parents care about that? Shouldn't that be a focus for us? And yet it appeared from my research that no one had ever studied that. So I developed a huge research project. I did 5 tours of North America, just going to the end points and beginning points of my various trips around North America. I covered 22,000 plus miles, to say nothing of the meandering along the routes to the various towns and so on to interview this person or that person. Luckily, because of my background and living in different places in this country and also in South America, and just my own personal friendships, I had a lot of contacts with diverse people. So I was able to draw up a very diverse sample, working with all these contacts all over North America, and interviewed 70 people of remarkably different backgrounds and ethnicities and beliefs and personalities and ages and so on, religions, everything, and get their life stories and find out what was meaningful to them. And then I summarized the themes in the final chapter of the book. But the heart of the book are the 59 stories that I selected out of the 70 to include. Remarkable as it may seem, some of the stories were repetitious, and no need to have repetitious stories in a book. So this is why I wheeled it down to 59 to try to reflect the total diversity that was out there. Then afterwards, anyone who wants to investigate this area can choose a given portion of that sample and maybe specialize there and really find out what's going on with that particular background. My job was, being the very first study in the area, to kind of lay the landscape so people have a general idea of what people find is important from their childhood and their teen years.
What kind of responses did you get when it became clear that you really were interested in their life story? Was that a surprise to some people?
No, they were forewarned that was what I was going to ask, that I was going to ask their life story. What I think surprised them when I was interviewing with them was how little I said, and how I let them take it away and let them develop the topic as they wished. Some people actually keyed in on 1 or 2 major events in their life. And then talked about what that meant at that time and what that has meant to them as an adult. And it was still a life story, because you could see that this was the key event of their childhood. But I think people were surprised that I was truly, genuinely interested in them and their take on life. And I wasn't going to interfere with that. My only subsequent questions after the initial research question were asking perhaps for details, because people will see things in their own mind and they think the movie's unraveling for you too, but it isn't. And so sometimes I have to say, now wait a minute, what exactly do you mean there? And could you explain further, please? But those were the only types of questions I asked, and that really surprised people. It also surprised people how much they got from giving that interview. They didn't know, they didn't realize how important it was to know their own story. They truly didn't. They didn't appreciate what they had accomplished in life. Each and every person had difficulties that they discussed, and they talked about how those resolved, and it wasn't always pretty. In some cases it was horrible, and yet they shared it and felt great relief afterwards. At the same time, of course, they were also sharing very wonderful events and pleasurable events, and it was fun for them to relive those, I think. But so they walked away, and I was thanked by many of them. Like I had done them a service when actually here they were giving me a story for my book, and a story that really is entertaining and informative all at once.
Did you spend quite a bit of time with each person? Or?
Well, I spent a good hour with most of them. Sometimes some wanted to speak for more than an hour, but most of them got talked out. They would tell you the major, what was primary in their mind.
Sure.
And after they got that point out, that was enough for them.
Okay. But it was good that they were appreciative of the fact that you were interested to hear their story.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I tried not to be an audience, like laughing or weeping, although there were occasions when I did laugh and when I did weep. Couldn't contain myself. But I tried not to be an audience, because then you're rewarding the person, you're reinforcing them, and you might alter their true story. So I tried just to be generally, I had an interested look on my face because I was genuinely interested, and I had two tape going, digital and regular tape recorder. So they knew I really cared. I'm sure that, body language alone would show them that I was really interested and cared. But I let them feel that they were in charge.
What kind of lessons do you think you learned from listening to them? What kind of lessons did they learn?
Okay, very good questions, Len. Lessons I learned: not to judge. Not to judge. We all say that, don't we? We all say, I don't want to judge. But truly, people would say some outrageous things, like when they bilked money out of people and things like this. And you might be thinking, oh, gee, that's not a pretty story. But the person turns around then and does something that is just absolutely mind-blowing. And if I can just remember that in my life, not to judge, and to genuinely appreciate each and every person, because there's no one else like them. They're unique. So, I also, more generally, just learned to love people, to love their humanness, to love the fact that they screwed up at times, to love the fact that they weren't always the smartest person or whatever, and they kept trying. You know, they persevered. They're doing their best they can. And if something is, if some of them can't overcome a given adversity, okay, accept that. They tried, and maybe it just isn't going to work for them. You know, we're all trying to do our best in general, is my feeling. And perhaps some people just had too much adversity. In fact, we know that from from other research, that some people are overwhelmed because they just have too much adversity. So, not to judge, just to love the person for the person.
You identified emotions as a key piece of what was coming out in this whole process. Can you say?
I think the emotions are
that?
the secret sauce of stories. That's why we tell stories. I don't really care when you were born. I don't even care that much about where you lived or how long or what degree you got or all these other things. What I really care about you is what has meaning to you in your life. What are you about? What are you trying to accomplish in the world? What difference are you making to this world? I think that's what matters for most of us about one another. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that.
But when that got opened up, did people readily identify with that, or were they reluctant to?
Oh, I never asked them about their meaning.
Okay.
Oh, no, I never did.
Right.
But the more they talked, they identified it.
Okay.
And you asked that question. You asked, what did they get out of it?
That's right.
Then that's what they got out of it.
It's not a question of telling, it's a question of listening.
Yes, of just letting them talk about themselves.
Tell themselves.
As they tell their own story, they will identify what was meaningful for them. And they will be proud of it. They knew how much effort it took.
And what does momentum mean in your title?
Momentum means that these memories, these hard times and the good times, take us forward. Without the hard times, we don't develop the skills and the perseverance that we need. And without the good times, we lack the humanness of love, of caring about one another. So momentum to me means that we've taken our past and we've applied it. Not to say we haven't learned new things, because that also happens. People get new insights, of course, into life too.
Your research, what was the term you used?
Qualitative.
Qualitative. When people ask for research and they ask for qualitative research, what are they expecting to come out of that, and how might that be used?
Right.
Is it part of work, career? Where does it fit? I mean,
right.
We know statistical research, you're counting numbers or eggs or,
right.
Well,
often we can study the same thing in two ways, statistical and qualitative. Qualitative is incorporating the person themselves, their understanding of what's occurred. And it may be exactly what the statistics show too. On the other hand, it might show something extra. And I think the two together are really wonderful.
Yeah.
But qualitative research is primarily the feelings and account that the person or persons that you're interviewing wish to share. And it's not only interviews. In this case, that's all I could do. But most qualitative researchers also want to hang out in a place and see how people get along without them when they're not aware they're being watched, Or I know when I did that big study on self-esteem and standards, I was looking to see if the classrooms were dirty or if they were overly clean. I was looking to see if the teachers talk to the students personally as well as professionally and so on. So observation, even looking at documents, looking at the dust on the baseboards of the classrooms, that was one way I could tell where was the teacher putting their energy. Was it into having a spiffy little environment, or was it an actual action, or maybe in some cases neither, who knows.
Yeah.
I'm not saying just because there's dust on the baseboards that means that the teacher really cared about the students. No, that might not be true. But you take all these things together and you can develop a pretty accurate composite. As I say, in my case, I was restricted to interviews because how can I say I want to hang around with you for a day?
Yeah.
I mean, my very presence would have changed their behavior totally.
Sure. Okay. So, is there something else that you would say was that you wanted to share for people who might be listening on and gaining this appreciation of listening to people's lives? And really, I really admire what you've done and appreciate that. Is there some last meanings that you want to emphasize?
I would just like to emphasize taking time with people and letting them talk and being there and listening to them. And I'm not saying to the point of, you're getting bored and you begin to resent that because they're going to feel that. But just in our everyday relationships, I think we should take time to be human with one another. And if somebody is wanting to tell a little story, make time for that. That might be interesting. It might help you. There are days when we can't do that. We simply have too much going and we can't. But I think I'm going to sound like I'm anti-technology when actually technology is really on our side here, because we can do some things quickly now. Then maybe that gives us more time for listening to one another. Carve out times and places in your lives where you can listen to people who really matter to you. Maybe they're your friends, maybe they're your parents, maybe grandparents. I was just talking with a lady who listened to a woman in her 90s who wasn't even related to her, but the stories were so inspiring and so remarkable that she took time to do that. And I think that's it. We're all scheduled these days, it seems like. We have these schedules that we go by. Okay, well then, let's just make time in our schedule for those moments when we can tell stories. And it's particularly important in our close relationships. Whether you're married, if you have a spouse, to take time to tell one another stories. It's not all about what do we need at the grocery store and have you cleaned the living room up yet? We have company coming, blah, blah, blah.
Well, it becomes task, right?
Yeah, task-oriented, right. It's taking time to know the real person and tell stories. And with friends, the same way. Sit around time.
Right.
I have a delightful friend that I've made in Lebanon where I've only lived 4 years. And we became good friends right away. She was interested in my book and offered to help me by proofreading it and so on. And from that grew this wonderful friendship. So we schedule walks together. That's when we get to share stories because there's no one disturbing us, no one's contacting us. We have nothing else going on. And our walks are actually very interesting. We take different trails and so on. And I have to say that she and I truly love each other, and we know each other at a relatively deep level. We know it's important to one another. And, not that we're always talking from this deep place. Sometimes we're just sharing superficial things about articles we've read or movies we've seen or interchanges we've had with so-and-so or whatever. But that's one way we schedule time together is to schedule a walk.
Right. That sounds great because
it is.
it enables us focus of life to come together in ways that you hadn't expected before.
And walking's healthy.
Yeah, that's right.
The funny thing is that we look entirely different. We dress differently. I'm very tall, almost 6 feet, and she's very short. You know, and no one would ever have thought that she and I. She doesn't use any makeup. I do use makeup. You know, things like this. Clothes are really important to me, not at all to her. And yet, you know, we just absolutely love each other, and this is how we stay close.
Yeah, the richness of life.
Yes.
Thank you. It's been fun listening to you talk about your book and reading. You have a chance to go further in reading your book, and we thank you for doing that.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Len. Thank you very much. I'm glad you're carrying forward the flag of meaning and stories.
We're glad you out there, you've spent the time with us. We thank you for that. And do enjoy those opportunities, those quality times for yourself and with your friends and with the people you know. And as we learn from life and see how big it is and how great it is. So thank you and have a good day.